Boycotting the Commonwealth summit in Sri Lanka because of the country's human rights record. India joins a protest by Canada. It's damaging the summit's credibility and raising questions about double standards in the Commonwealth. This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. A controversial Commonwealth summit in Sri Lanka has been dealt a double blow. India says Prime Minister Manmohan Singh won't be going to the meeting that was to have been attended by representatives from 53 nations. India is the group's biggest member. Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper has already confirmed he won't be turning up. Sri Lanka has been accused of failing to address accusations of human rights abuses in the civil war against Tamil separatists and of committing violations since then. Speaking in October, Harper said Canada was disturbed by ongoing reports of intimidation and incarceration of political leaders and journalists, harassment of minorities, reported disappearances and allegations of extrajudicial killings. Sri Lanka's civil war was waged in the north and east for more than 26 years. The Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, or Tamil Tigers, wanted to create an independent state. They were finally defeated in May 2009, but it is the events of the final few months of the conflict that have raised specific concerns. The UN says both sides committed atrocities against civilians and called for an investigation into possible war crimes. The Sri Lankan government is accused of attacking civilian areas, something the government denies. The UN believes 40,000 ethnic Tamil civilians were killed in the closing stages of the war, with 70,000 people unaccounted for. So what effect are events in Sri Lanka going to have on the upcoming summit there? Are Commonwealth nations guilty of hypocrisy? And can Sri Lanka shape the future direction of the Commonwealth as it takes over the organisation's leadership for the next 2 years? Let's bring in our guests to discuss just that. From New Delhi, K.C. Singh, a former Indian diplomat and strategic affairs expert. And in London, we have Alan Keenan, the Sri Lanka project director for the International Crisis Group. And on Skype from Singapore is Sri Lankan journalist, broadcaster and researcher Kalinga Senaviratne. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. K.C. Singh, why do you think Manmohan Singh has decided not to go? What are his reasons?
Well, I've said in the past, I've written about it, I think it's the right decision taken for the wrong reasons. It's been taken for domestic reasons because both the major parties in the southern state of Tamil Nadu made it known that they would take offense if the Prime Minister visited there. And with the national elections due anytime early next year, Congress party can hardly scoff at that. But it is the right decision, as I said, because it's a question of deciding what Commonwealth group of countries is really all about.
So do you think he's taken this more for his political survival and his political legacy rather than the impact of what it might have on the investigations or lack of investigations in Sri Lanka?
I suspect that because the letter which he has written, we only have anecdotal evidence, we haven't got the text of that, is a very short letter. He's not crossing swords with Sri Lanka on their domestic policy or handling of human rights issues. He's simply saying for some factors I cannot visit.
So what do you think he is hoping to achieve by playing this hand?
I think by underplaying it, they're hoping that they're able to maintain a relationship or a door open to Sri Lanka. They don't offend them too much. But at the same time, they want to appease the two parties or appease the people of Tamil Nadu.
Kalinga, what do you make of the fact that he's not going to go, Manmohan Singh?
I think Sri Lanka should not take much notice about it because, as the previous speaker said, what he's doing is he's playing domestic politics because there's elections coming up next year and the Tamil Nadu votes will be very crucial for the Congress party. And also it shows, I think, Commonwealth is not very important for India because India is in G20. They are in the East Asia Economic Summit, East Asia Summit. And those are more important for India because those are the two organizations which will shape the global order of the future. Commonwealth is just irrelevant.
But considering the size of India and the fact that it is the Commonwealth's biggest member, it's quite a statement, isn't it?
I don't think it's that much. I see it as more playing domestic politics. And I know in Sri Lanka, people are fed up of India using Sri Lanka for domestic politics. So are the Tamil Nadu politicians.
You know the way. I don't think it's, you know the way India works. You know the way the Commonwealth works. What sort of statement do you think it is? The fact that he is sending a representative. He himself is not going, but certainly a representative is going. What do you think the subtlety of that is?
Yeah, because now the Indian Prime Minister, from what I understand, hasn't attended all Commonwealth summits in the last 10 years. I think he has only attended 2 or 3 summits.
Alan, let me bring you in now. I mean, this gesture by Manmohan Singh, or the fact that he's not going, does it impact on your work in any way? Will it help or hinder the process on the ground?
Well, I don't know, but I think it was. I think what Mr. Singh has said is definitely true. It was obviously domestic issues are behind it in part, but if you look at the Indian government's position on Sri Lanka over the last 3 or 4 years, it has slowly been getting tougher, and it's they voted twice at the UN Human Rights Council in support of US-sponsored resolutions that were highly critical of the Sri Lankan government for both refusing to investigate the allegations that you mentioned earlier about possible war crimes at the end of the war, but also at the deterioration of democratic governance and human rights protections as we speak. So, and they've clearly been sending very strong messages privately to the government. So this, I think, is consistent with what is an increasingly firm line from India on a range of issues in Sri Lanka. And then getting to your question, I think that is absolutely crucial to the work of all organizations and citizens around the world who are concerned about the deterioration of democratic governance in Sri Lanka, most obviously captured in the impeachment, the unconstitutional impeachment of the Supreme Court Chief Justice in January. So there's a whole range of human rights issues and governance issues.
Update us, if you will, on what it is that we know about the end of the war and what's happening in the country right now.
Oh, well, that could take a while, and I realize you only have a few minutes. But, well, I mean, in terms of the end of the war, I mean, more and more evidence is coming out about what appear to have been grave crimes committed by both sides, executions of both captured civilians and captured tigers, the mass shelling of heavily concentrated areas, heavily concentrated with civilians. So, I mean, I think as the UN panel of experts report from 2 years ago, or almost 3 years ago now, lays out, I think, the basic picture. While we don't know all the details, I think the basic picture they lay out is correct. And then since then, there's been the impeachment of the Chief Justice this year. There was a constitutional amendment 3 years ago that gave the president increased powers and removed the independence of a number of important commissions. There have been, there's an ongoing wave of attacks on both Christians and Muslims carried out by radical Buddhist groups with the support to some degree of elements of the government and a refusal by the police to intervene. There's ongoing pressure, very severe pressure on the media, on human rights activists. I mean, there's a long list of problems, as well as the ongoing position of Tamils in the northern province, which continues to be they come under a lot of pressure: land grabs, lack of political power, militarization of the north. There's a long series of issues which we are sketching out in a report next year.
In such an effective pre-seed version.
Next week we have a report coming out. Yeah.
Okay, you've got a report coming out next week. I look forward to getting the findings from that. Kalinga, I mean, when you hear all that, don't you think that there is a place for the Commonwealth, for India and for Canada to raise this issue now? I mean, if not now, when?
Yeah, now, right at the beginning of the program, you mentioned a figure of 40,000. Where are the names? People mention these figures in thousands, but I have never seen anybody giving any names of these people who have been killed. And the other thing is, they say that both sides committed human rights, but the other side was vanquished in the final battle. So if that is so, why should you carry on like this? Now, if the other side, the Tamil Tigers, I mean, their leaders were killed during the final battle, then should the Tamil Tiger leaders in London and Toronto and those places and Oslo who have been supporting them all this while should be held accountable for the war crimes, so-called war crimes of the Tamil Tigers then? Now, because both one side is not there, carrying on this thing, I think is smacks of it's just useless thing because on the other hand, the British who are of course the main leaders of the Commonwealth, now British forces have also been accused of human rights violations and war crimes in Afghanistan, the NATO bombings in Libya. Then shouldn't the Commonwealth take that up as well? Well, if the Commonwealth is willing to take up war crimes committed by NATO forces where British have been involved and also in Afghanistan and Iraq, then I have no problem if the Sri Lankan issue is also taken as part of that. This is pure double standards.
Okay, let's talk about the possible double standards and what the Commonwealth is all about. The Commonwealth of Nations is a loose association of former British colonies, plus some others. It was founded in 1931. There are currently 53 member states. Britain's Queen Elizabeth II is the official head. And the Commonwealth spans 6 of the 7 continents with an estimated population in excess of 2 billion. Several countries have been suspended from the Commonwealth from what were considered serious or persistent violations. Nigeria was excluded from 1995 until 1999 for executing activist Ken Saro-Wiwa. The military coup by Pervez Musharraf saw Pakistan suspended from 1999 until 2004. Zimbabwe pulled out in 2003 after being suspended because of Robert Mugabe's electoral and land reforms. Fiji's membership has variously lapsed or been suspended since declaring itself a republic in 1987 and following a series of coups just last month. The Gambia withdrew in the face of human rights criticism, branding the Commonwealth a near-colonial institution. So, given these precedents, should Sri Lanka have been suspended? KC Singh.
Well, the movement, as you recounted, the movement in the Commonwealth has been towards making it a different kind of grouping, different from the non-aligned movement, different from, say, members of the United Nations, many of which have different kinds of governments and different levels of adherence to separation of powers or rules of law. Therefore, Commonwealth, since the Harare Declaration and leading up to 2006, when the heads of government at Malta accepted the Latimer House principles, which were around separation of powers, independence of judiciary, and so on and so forth. So on that basis, the 18th Amendment of Sri Lanka, the 18th Amendment of the Constitution, has been regressive. It's moved back in the direction where judiciary is less independent, the press has been under pressure. That has been an issue. So when the decision was taken to hold the summit there, I think it was expected that perhaps Sri Lanka would move in the direction of both devolution of power and reconciliation, as well as coming to terms with what had happened there. The war, after all, civil war ended in 2009. So Sri Lanka's had 4 years. Since 2011, they had their own commission. It was called the LLRC, the Lessons Learned and the Reconciliation Commission. So even whatever that commission said, leave aside what the Human Rights Council was saying, but their own commission conceded that there were civilian deaths, there were army, perhaps accounts of army excesses. Sri Lankan government should have moved ahead. And I think that's what Government of India was expecting, that they would have moved ahead to reach out. And even though we've had elections in the north, 2 essential powers have not been devolved, and that is control over the police and control over land. Now, without that, that government is really toothless. Therefore, Sri Lankan government has done really minimum while moving their own governments towards more authoritarian manifestations. And I think that is something which goes at the root of where the Commonwealth group of countries were trying to move.
But if it is a hypocritical body, as Kalinga pointed out, I mean, you wonder where the incentive is to get these sort of things resolved, and you obviously threw up a few of the problems there. I mean, there are certain double standards, aren't there? Britain, Australia launching an illegal war. In Uganda and Malawi, they've outlawed homosexuality, and yet there's no action taken against those member states. Why is that?
Look, it's an imperfect world, but as groupings go, the idea was to move this group of 53 countries, which have a common language, a common heritage of being British colonies, largely, one or two others have come in. The idea was that this will be a cohesive grouping, which will be in keeping with the values generally accepted in the world today. And after all, ever since the Cold War ended, the number of democracies in the world have grown. The movement largely is in the direction of democratic governance. And that was the idea, was that the Commonwealth group of countries will become a beacon for that. So the challenge is when summit is held in Sri Lanka and those issues are raised again, that what kind of a country is Sri Lanka becoming or wants to become. The hope was that they would move in the reverse direction, that they would devolve power, they would reconcile, and there would be an example how you end a civil war.
Because Kalinga, what the Commonwealth says it stands for is promoting democracy, good governance, human rights and prosperity. There are quite a few countries in there that don't possibly promote that, and Sri Lanka possibly one of them.
Yeah, let me take the last point you made, prosperity. I think that should be should come on top rather than the others, because now, I have been living in Singapore for the last 10 years or so, and Singapore is a shining example of this. You know, people may say that Singapore is an authoritarian state, but when you live here, you see that how the emphasis on development and a comparatively non-corrupt political system has made Singapore what it is today. And I think what Sri Lanka has been trying to do since 2009, since the end of the war, is very much this type of model, the Chinese, Singaporean, or even the Malaysian model, of giving more emphasis to development. And if you go, I have been to Jaffna last October, and I saw it myself through my own eyes, how the army and the people together in Jaffna are working together, building roads, building houses. The army is not even carrying guns there. So, this the people have to build trust, and the trust can't be built by talking about constitutional changes, because that's very divisive.
So it seems that you want the Commonwealth to focus more on trade relations and ignore human rights, possibly.
I won't say ignore, but give more emphasis to trade relations, the economic interest of members.
Alan, do you think it'll benefit those in Sri Lanka who feel that justice hasn't been given, that they haven't achieved justice by having the Commonwealth there? And what do you think of the stance of the fact that India is not going and Canada, and yet Britain is going? Is it more effective to have that sort of eye-to-eye contact, to be able to get answers that way?
Well, that will depend on what actually the British Prime Minister and other heads of government actually say, both privately and publicly, and we don't know. I mean, David Cameron is saying that he's going to deliver a very strong message to President Rajapaksa about the need to have accountability for allegations about what happened at the end of the war, as well as ongoing human rights issues and governance deficits. And I hope he will. I think others should also echo him. It shouldn't just be David Cameron. But I think, I think going back, it was a mistake to have the Commonwealth heads of government meeting in Colombo to begin with. I think, especially since, because of the 18th Amendment that Mr. Singh has mentioned and the impeachment of the Chief Justice, I think it's been in flagrant violation of the basic principles that the Commonwealth
but don't you think that it could possibly focus the world more on Sri Lanka and the events underway there?
Well, that's, I think, what we're already seeing, and I think that's always been the flip side, is that, I mean, the government has wanted this event to be a showcase of all of the wonderful things they say they're doing, the infrastructure projects and sort of cleaning up Colombo and making it all a happy place. But I think there's always been the possibility, and I think we're beginning to see that with effective media coverage from a variety of, from journalists who are going to the Commonwealth as well as those who are preparing programs in advance, that the real story of the growing authoritarianism, the lack of accountability, the corruption, a whole series of problems that Sri Lankans of all ethnicities, Sinhalese, Muslim, Tamil, are all suffering from, that those will come out more clearly. And I think that I think there's a possibility that ultimately this attention might make Chogam a problem for the Sri Lankan government more than a propaganda victory.
Casey Singh, how important is what happens in Sri Lanka during this summit, and while Sri Lanka is at the helm of the Commonwealth, for the reputation of the Commonwealth?
See, normally, as the previous speaker said, the focus comes when the summit is there. In between summits, there are programs, and really the Secretariat of the Commonwealth takes over in London and runs those programs. There's really not that much of activity in which the host nation or the one chairing it is involved in. So the essential focus will be now, and then we'll drift on till the next meeting. But for India, it's a permanent issue because we have a neighbor, an important neighbor, and what happens in the northern part of that resonates in a very important state of India's. And besides, of course, the second issue of values that India shares.
Aren't you worried by backing off, India backing off, that you're going to get China claiming a bigger stake in Sri Lanka?
My own personal view is that China is anywhere there, and China will be there in any country. But at the same time, in the new Asia, in the Asia of the future, there has to be a counterpoint to China. And the counterpoint has to come from a country like India and from values that India espouses. And these are not Western values. These are there from the Ashokan, from the Buddhist times. We have them in edicts for 2,000 years. Human rights is not a new issue for India. So India has to be the counterpoint. India has always, for millennia altogether, been an exporter of ideas. And therefore, we should be the counterpoint. We don't have to copy China. And that is how the two balance out. It's not a question of using your financial or commercial muscle to enforce your values. It's a question of really espousing universal values.
And Kalinga, what about Sri Lanka's sovereignty while all these discussions take place on its soil?
Yeah, it's have these discussions is fine. I have no problem with it. But it's the double standards of all these arguments. You see, the issue of there are. I acknowledge there are issues about human rights in Sri Lanka at the moment. It's not just only involving the Tamils. But on the other side, there is also a feeling in the country that there are international forces trying to destabilize the country. When there is such a feeling among the population at large and the government would tend to become more authoritative as a self-defensive measure, and the people would support it. You must acknowledge that the majority of the people in Sri Lanka, especially in the south, are still supportive of the Rajapaksa regime.
Okay, and, sorry, let me put this final question to Alan, if I may. I mean, Alan, where to from here for Sri Lanka, and what is it that you would like to see, and what do you think is really achievable?
Well, I think what might be achievable is some small progress in the north following the Northern Provincial Council elections. As Mr. Singh has pointed out, the powers that the Provincial Council currently has are very limited. But I think with coordinated and sort of skillful pressure from India, whose pressure was crucial to getting those elections, along with the United States, the UN Human Rights Council, and other important actors, Sri Lanka the government might be nudged to actually allow that council to work effectively. I think that would be a positive sign towards reconciliation. I think crucially also the military will have to roll back its heavy presence in the north. And then I think it's possible that if the message is strong enough from the Human Rights Council and other powerful nations are sent to the Rajapaksa regime, that they might pull back a bit on their authoritarianism and begin to open up the space for a real democratic environment to be reborn in Sri Lanka, where the voices of the opposition, the voices of activists and the media are allowed to be heard, and then Sri Lankans of all ethnicities will be able to really have a real say in how their country is governed.
Let's hope you get your wish. Alan Keenan there with those final words. KC Singh and Kalinga Seneviratne. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And don't forget, you can find this programme at aljazeera.com and you can leave us your thoughts there too. I'm Jane Dutton. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.